Designing for Digital Exclusion, The Forgotten Users, with Emma Goddard and Lola Burton. AliCamp 2022. AliCamp would like to thank our gold sponsors Intopia, Salesforce and Telstra, and silver sponsors ANZ, Deloitte Digital and Coles.
Hello everyone. Welcome to our talk on designing for digital exclusion. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Emma Goddard. I head up our inclusive design and accessibility offerings for Deloitte Digital. I'm a white female in my 30s. I have reddish auburn hair and I'm wearing my glasses today, which I often forget, but conveniently tend to remember when I need to look extra smart. I recently spent 5 years leading the inclusive design practice at Deloitte UK. And a year of that time, I was leading on inclusive design for the COVID test and trace program at the height of the pandemic. Before we move on, I'll do an acknowledgement of country. So Lola's actually tuning into us from New York, so she'll share a different one. But I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we gather. For me, this is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We recognise their continued connection to land and waters and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. We extend that respect to all elders past, present and emerging, and to First Nations people with us today. Over to you, Lola.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Lola Burton. I'm a UX designer and consultant at Deloitte Digital. And I've been sort of going through and doing a lot of digital exclusion research. I have some experience with the public sector in user experience design. So I find that this area is very important when it comes to that sort of industry. I love croissants and savory baked goods as well. And just to describe myself, I am a Caucasian female with brown hair, blue eyes, and also wearing my glasses today. As Emma mentioned, I am dialing in from New York, so I'd like to acknowledge the Lenape Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands I gather today, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today.
So today we'll be running through what digital exclusion is, particularly in Australia, the benefits of designing for digital exclusion, and then some tips on how to design to address this divide. And we'll have some time for questions at the end when Lola and I will jump on live. So despite being someone who knew quite a bit about designing for digital exclusion, the full extent of the digital divide wasn't something that was front and center for me until the pandemic hit in the UK. And all of a sudden we had to design a testing program that truly worked for and reached literally everyone. And it was a huge shock to me and the program just how widespread of a barrier this was. And I think as digital natives, this is sometimes difficult to comprehend how vast this is as an issue. So we have a graph on the right here that shows that 28%, which is over 1 in 4 Australians, are considered digitally excluded. So meaning they don't have the skills or the access they need to fully participate in today's world. So with a lot of organizations rapidly transitioning to this digital first mindset, if they haven't already, there really needs to be far more consideration of this as a barrier than there is today.
So the Australian Digital Inclusion Index is the leading organisation providing data and visibility on the digital divide in Australia. And they have highlighted that digital exclusion can be measured in these 3 pillars. So we have accessibility, affordability, and digital confidence. And these factors really intersect and can compound or sort of exclude each other in order to create varied degrees of exclusion. So for example, someone may be highly technically literate, but lack a device or the internet connection to actually exercise that skill. Or someone might have the latest MacBook Pro, but they don't have the skills and knowledge or confidence in how to utilize the device and therefore access the benefits of having that technology. So Australians who are already vulnerable are the ones also experiencing the most severe exclusion, which makes it even more critical to ensure that we're not widening these inequalities even further. And these population groups include people who are low income, low levels of education and employment, living in regional areas, people aged over 65, people living with a disability, and First Nations. And 30% of regional First Nations communities have no household internet or phone connection. And just to point out another kind of statistic around, age over 65, who are typically some of the most excluded population and people and users, the research shows that 80% find it difficult to keep up with technology changes. So you can only imagine what the last 3 years and the rapid transformation has been like for that population group. So the internet and digital technology is at the heart of how public, economic, and social life now functions. And it's become integral to all aspects of life. And as Emma said, that's been only accelerated by the events of the pandemic. There's a statistic there that 87% of jobs in Australia require digital skills. So that highlights that if you are digitally excluded, you might continue to miss out on economic opportunities. Being digitally excluded can have real or long-lasting impacts. And we have 2 ABC articles here. I'll just describe the headlines verbally as well. The first article reads, "Homelessness and Digital Exclusion, Why a $10 phone card Can Be a Matter of Life or Death." And the second article reads, "Centrelink Communication Like an Alien Language for Australians of Migrant Backgrounds." And I just want to draw attention to that second article there. Here they highlighted the difficulties that culturally and linguistically diverse Australians face with understanding and trusting Centrelink communications. And some of the people interviewed had actually ended up with $30,000 of debt. And they had to engage specialized legal help to detangle those complex processes and the requirements because their needs weren't addressed in the first place. So ensuring that all Australians are brought along the transformation journey will be key to the success of the digital services and product revolution that's happening in Australia right now. We do have an article pictured here, which I will just read. It's an excerpt from the federal government's digital strategy report, stating that all government services are available digitally by 2025. So that was a goal that they had set. So you can imagine that with a failure to address digital inclusion at this sort of critical point when social services and economic benefits are now transitioning rapidly, that it creates a more extreme exclusion if we don't deal with it now. And Australians will be unable to access important social services and important digital products at this point if we don't address it. Additionally, there's also a business opportunity to address digital exclusion. During the transformation of customer experiences, businesses and organizations have an opportunity to embrace accessible design and utilize assisted digital channels to ensure that their services and products are inclusive to vulnerable populations. And by including vulnerable populations, they can grow their market share and also just reach new customers. People with disabilities have a spending power of 40 billion in Australia, and research shows that they're very loyal to inclusive experiences and trusted organizations. Additionally, engaging digitally excluded customers leads to a decreased financial and also social burden for the company and society as a whole. And so research by CBAR actually shows that the economy can grow by almost $30 for every $2 invested in digital skills. And you can see, there's actually just a benefit here in terms of organizations building a reputation and showing that they have a commitment to inclusion, that it's not just a requirement or a tick box. They're really actually showing that they want to commit and they want to, invest money and show that they care about this issue.
So we're seeing that this as a topic is really gathering momentum in key markets overseas. So I witnessed this firsthand as an increasingly rapid kind of focus for a number of organisations in the UK. The Good Things Foundation is an example of a not-for-profit that is scaling enormously and has actually scaled recently to Australia, and they are exclusively focused on closing the digital divide. The UK government is also investing heavily in this with a long-awaited white paper on levelling up digital skills and boosting digital skills training. We're also seeing other large organisations like Accenture launching digital skills training programs overseas. And so while there is some great activity happening in Australia, for example, the Good Things Foundation are working in regional communities to build trust with people who are less digitally confident and build awareness in what digital can bring to their communities. There is not enough attention overall as, designers, as people developing products and services in organizations or across Australia to close this increasing divide. So how can we design to reduce this divide? We have 6 top tips to share with you. Going to use the case study of the work that I did recently in the UK on the NHS Test and Trace program. So what happened was an organisation the size of the BBC was stood up in a matter of days, essentially, which was an incredible feat. And I think we were delivering over 100,000 tests within weeks. And this rapid response saved a lot of lives, but it also meant that compromises were made in regard to accessibility and inclusion to get the service stood up so quickly. And so the challenges that were, I guess, existent when I joined the program, that there was some awareness and it was growing of digital exclusion, but it was inconsistent. So people weren't really fully aware of the extent of the issue. And that meant that teams were designing and delivering for digital journeys separately from a non-digital solution. We were also forcing people to enter email and mobile on a number of different channels, and the non-digital routes to testing we were really struggling to get them prioritized in such a fast-paced environment. So our tip number 1 is to challenge the digital by default mindset. So what we mean here is that non-digital needs to be considered from the outset and not tacked on at the end, which can create a very tricky and expensive retrofitting exercise. So we did 2 things on the Test and Trace program. One was to build awareness that digitally excluded users are a large, diverse, and really important cohort. So we built a business case around that. It wasn't too extensive, but we just took the stats and the feedback that we were getting from our research on the impact that the barriers to digital were having to build that awareness. And then secondly, we implemented an approach where our design teams actually had to have a non-digital channel on their service blueprints. So when we were mapping out a journey, we were really forced to think about what would this look like if I didn't have access to digital. Our second tip is to include people who are digitally excluded in your research and testing. We were really fortunate on the NHS work to be able to run dedicated rounds of digital exclusion research. So we ran 3 rounds specifically with people who didn't have access to the internet or devices, and it was incredibly enlightening. Often their experience of the world, of accessing healthcare, of COVID, was incredibly different to our own as designers, and so it was really valuable to learn from them. And often those insights actually led to innovations that improved the experience for everyone. If you can't do dedicated rounds of research with people who are digitally excluded, then make sure you're including them as a hard requirement in your ongoing just general research and testing every day. So raise it with your agency early, or get creative about your recruitment methods, but really think about how you're going to reach these people. And sometimes that means having a bit of a different approach. We had a lot of phone calls to people on their landlines, and we weren't showing prototypes obviously, but we were discussing their needs and how they needed to access testing.
So another key point to address digital exclusion is that you need to cater to fluid needs and journeys. So user needs can change at different points in the journey, and services and user journeys have to be flexible to allow users to move between channels as and when needed. So this might mean digital and non-digital touch points, and also just understanding that their situational exclusion may be different and may be ad hoc. So they might sometimes have access to the internet and they sometimes might not. But a sort of example there from the NHS was that during the registration experience which would often align to the early stages of COVID, people were experiencing heightened anxiety and often became overwhelmed. And also sometimes they had severe symptoms and were simply too sick to continue with a digital journey, and even looking at a screen was very challenging. Another one here is where possible, you have assisted digital channels aiming to build confidence and capability in people with low digital literacy. So contributing to overall digital inclusion and reducing the reliance on expensive and assisted channels. So you can see in the NHS example, they established a blueprint for in-person COVID testing at universities, and Deloitte UK had designed a dedicated, safe and inclusive physical space with tablets and assistive staff. But the staff would actually just help them go through the COVID registration. They wouldn't do it themselves. As in they would allow the user to help build their skills while using the tablet, explain what was happening in each step in the process, but not be the ones physically entering in the data, so that they would have an opportunity to engage and upskill in their digital literacy with the COVID process.
Number 5 is making sure that everyone is aware that your service exists. So on Test and Trace, when we did do those rounds of digital exclusion research, we found that some people, even 6 months into the pandemic, were actually not aware that there was a COVID testing program at all. They were expecting a leaflet to have come through the post, or their GP, who they trust, to have told them about it. So it's really important that you're not just thinking about the design of a service, but how are you going to reach people who may be digitally excluded so that they're aware of a service. So that could be making sure that you're considering, physically trusted networks. So we used pharmacies, local community centres, but it could also be kind of printed pamphlets, and making sure that your comms are translated into the right languages as well. And finally, we have don't discount the value of physically present networks. So a lot of organizations today are transitioning to online and moving away from their brick and mortar services. So this is not to say that is the wrong move, but again, this links back to point 1 about challenging the digital by default mindset. For some products or some services, having a physically present network is really necessary, really beneficial, specifically with something like a government service for COVID. This was really necessary. And so when we learnt that these trusted physical networks were so critical to getting information out and getting access to the service, that contributed to the program ramping up on using trusted pharmacy and GP networks, but also, as I mentioned earlier, kind of trusted religious centres, community centres, and ramping up radio campaigns as well.
So just to play back those 6 top tips that we called out around addressing the digital exclusion and working to close the digital divide. The first one there, challenge the digital by default mindset. Also include digitally excluded people in research and testing. Ensure you're catering to fluid needs and user journeys. Take responsibility for developing confidence and ability in excluded users. Make sure the awareness and communication addresses your user needs. And don't discount the value of physical networks.
Alrighty, and that's it. If you'd like to know more about how to design for digital exclusion, please reach out to anytime to Deb, Lola, or myself. It's been a pleasure to deliver this talk, and I believe we will now have some time for questions, so we'll be tuning in live. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
AliCamp 2022.